When I was in DC this week, I had a bunch of meetings, and so many of the staffers listened to the pod. And they came up to me. They're like, "Hey, love you guys. Listen every week. It's really great." It's really crazy, actually, the reach of this thing. It's really cool.
Now, when you were in DC, how gleeful were they about Sachs's absolute shellacking last week? That must have been high fives all over. The Dems, like, they won twice. Trump announced and Sachs lost.
Listen, we talked a lot about...
How nervous are they about SBF and how much money he gave them in order to stop that red wave?
Well, take it easy. I talked to a lot of folks, and what I would say is we talked a lot about energy policy, life sciences, obviously, two areas that I invest a lot of money in, and foreign policy. And actually, David, you'd be surprised by how many fans you have there.
Cool. Well, I mean, like General Milley, like we talked about last week, he's come around. Jake Sullivan just this week said that he told the Ukrainians, it was reported that they can't have Crimea back, get realistic. So Jake Sullivan and Milley are like the voices of reason now in the administration on this. And they're just saying the same thing I've been saying, for which I was excoriated by the foreign policy establishment. And I got into a little Twitter spat with Ian Bremner this week, because all of a sudden he posted, "Oh, everybody has been privately saying that we need to negotiate." No, you haven't. You were criticizing, you were denouncing Elon as a Kremlin agent when he posted that Twitter poll suggesting that the Ukrainians should negotiate. So you were publicly denouncing those of us who were calling for negotiations. And now all of a sudden you're saying, well, this has always been the position. But I think what's significant about that is the guy's just a weather vane for the blob and the foreign policy establishment. And so the weather vane is now pointing towards negotiations. So that's the good news here.
Do you think that if DeSantis wins the presidency, you will be nominated as Secretary of State?
Treasury? What would you take? Treasury?
No,
Secretary of State?
State.
Sachs, if you were offered a cabinet position, would you take it?
You should take it.
What you have to understand is that my position on foreign policy, or Ukraine specifically, is not adopted by either party. I mean, McConnell and the Senate Republican leadership are very much on board with the Biden administration's policy on this. They are very, very hawkish. It's really the uniparty on this issue. There's really just one consolidated blob.
Okay, but back to the question. Would it be a dream of yours? Would you find great joy in having a White House position?
To serve your country.
When DeSantis goes in.
To serve your country.
Would you serve?
Would I serve? If the president of the United States calls you up and asks you to do something, obviously you have to serve your country. But it's not something I'm actively looking for.
That's a yes.
What if he asked you to serve as the U.S. ambassador to Burkina Faso?
Where?
What?
The ambassador roles are so funny. It's like you have to compete for the good ones, and then some people get stuck with the bad ones.
Those are available for purchase.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You know, there's like a menu of these things, like these ambassadorships. Like I don't think it's like written down anywhere, but it's kind of like unspoken. It's like if you want the ambassadorship to the UK, that's like $10 million, and then like
affordable.
France.
No. The thing with UK and France, it's every embassy, every ambassadorship comes with an annual budget. But the cost of actually running that embassy and really throwing the parties is much more. So for the UK and France, the gap is $10 million a year that you have to fund out of pocket. So you got to be really willing, to put the money up. But apparently,
you got to pay for the parties.
My friend was the ambassador to the UK under Obama, and I went to a party there. It's unbelievable, and he has the best life because, he was meeting everybody in the world you can imagine. Goes through the UK and then wants to meet the US ambassador. It was a great job for him.
Right, but the money I'm talking about is the cost of buying one of these sinecures. You have to typically raise that much money. You got to bundle. Yeah, you bundle that much money for whoever. This is what I've heard. I mean, I don't know. This is what I've heard is that.
Well, does that mean that SBF's parents, if Elizabeth Warren wins the presidency, SBF's parents are going to get some ambassadorship?
Right now, the Illuminati just revoked all of our Illuminati cards. We're not supposed to talk about this, guys, that you can buy an ambassadorship. But speaking of buying politicians and coverage, let's get an update on FTX. So
wait, what about Trump? Speaking of politics, I mean,
you bring it up because if I bring it up, I didn't want to tilt Sachs in the first 5 minutes.
The only thing I want to bring up is I think I'm entitled to, and I told you so on this. There was a story where the FBI said that the reason why Trump kept the boxes in his basement, they've now The FBI has definitively said it's because he was just trying to preserve mementos, not try to sell state secrets to the Saudis or something like that, like some people were making wild conspiracy theories about. So, Jake, it looks like I was right about that. In fact, I think we had that very discussion on this pod.
Yeah, I mean, I said I thought he was keeping it for like keepsakes, like mementos. That was my position too, because he's a hoarder.
Really? You didn't support this Saudi conspiracy theory?
Let me ask you a question, because
I wouldn't put it past him. He's a maniac.
I think if you believe that this was about mementos, which the FBI has now said it was, I think you also have to say that the FBI's approach in raiding his home with armed, soldiers was heavy-handed. Now, I'm not saying they didn't have the legal right to do it. I'm sure they checked all the right boxes, but it was heavy-handed. But look, that brings me to another point. Why do they do it? I actually suspect now that what the Biden administration is trying to do is keep Trump in the news. I think they actually want to provoke him.
They want him to run.
They want him in the news.
It's
the exact same thing. Remember the $50 million that went into Republican primaries to support the election denier candidate? Turns out that was a successful strategy for them, as much as I hate to admit it. It's as reckless as I think that was, and hypocritical, because I don't think you can be out there claiming that these candidates are a threat to democracy at the very same time you're funding them. So I think it was completely hypocritical and sort of Machiavellian, but it worked. And I think in a similar way, what the Democrats are going to try to do over the next years is keep Trump in the news as much as possible. And in fact, CNN ran his entire speech announcing last Tuesday, I think, for this reason.
If Trump wins the Republican nomination,
he's going to,
then he will lose the presidency. Because if you look at all of these exit polls that came out of these midterms, he's just so massively unfavorable. But that's not what's going to be, litigated in the primaries. In the primaries, it's just Republican on Republican. And there are a non-trivial number of paths where Trump actually beats DeSantis. And I think that's very scary to the Republicans who want to just move on and have a chance of actually consolidating power. And it's gleefully blissful for the Democrats because and we saw this, look, if the Democrats were able to fund and field MAGA candidates in the Republican primaries that then lost in the general election, well, the best MAGA candidate of all is Trump. So David Sachs is completely right. Now, like the balance of power here should be, if you're the Democrats, whatever you can do to keep him in the news, whatever you can do to induce him to run, makes a lot of sense because he'll cripple the Republican Party. He'll split and fracture the vote.
Look at how Jake House got a big win. He's admitting to the hypocrisy,
Absolutely.
Which is for years he's been screaming about what a threat.
Your boy.
Hold on a second. You've been screaming about what a threat to democracy is, how he's secretly on the payroll of the Kremlin or foreign governments, and yet you want to keep him in the news. You want him to be the nominee.
And you Republicans don't have the common sense to kick him out of the party.
No, I do.
You're cowards. Kick him out.
Come on. I was on the DeSantis train before the midterms election.
But you won't kick Trump out. You on this pod will never kick him out of the party. You should say,
how am I supposed to kick him out?
I think you guys should all disavow him. Publicly disavow him.
How? I've already said I support DeSantis. I said it before the midterms. What else do you want me to do? But by the way, I don't think
party writ large.
I think you and many other people on the Democratic side in the media are being very hypocritical about this because you want to claim that he's this unique threat to democracy while playing this game where you want to keep him in the news. You want to basically provide him with as much oxygen as possible because you think he's more beatable. And by the way, I agree that he's less electable than DeSantis, which is why part of the reason why I'm on the DeSantis train. I also think that I also think DeSantis would get more done. But look, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he's going to be the nominee. Did you see the new polling that came out after the midterms? DeSantis is now the favorite among Republican primary voters, among every different slicing that you want to do of whether it's likely Republican voters, primary voters, whether it's Fox News viewers, and on and on and on. DeSantis is now ahead of Trump by about.
Okay, wait, hold on. I need to be able to state my position because Sachs interrupted me 7 times. So I just would like to get my position out here. Number one, you all backed somebody who is a horrible human being who made terrible decisions. And now you guys keep supporting him. At some point, you have to put your foot down and say, listen, we don't want this guy. You have to publicly say January 6th, and this guy's approach, the election denial, you guys have to come out and just say, we don't want this person to run. I think you've been hedging too much. I think that's the problem. Now,
who has?
I am not.
How can
I think the Republican
clearer?
Party. Yeah, no, you always were a little bit like, because I did ask you on this very pod. Hold on. On this very pod, I asked you, if he run, would you support him? Would you ever vote for him again? And you were like, well, and you would vote for him again. If he wins the nomination, you'll vote for him. That's the truth. Republicans will still vote for him.
Look, you know that before it was popular, before the midterms, I was on the DeSantis train. I was saying so on this pod for over a year when it was very unpopular, certainly in the area in which I live. And so, and there are a lot of Republicans now, most Republicans now agree with me on this issue, according to the polling that just took place.
But if he wins the nomination, look, you will vote for him.
Jason, is that you want us to buy into every bullshit narrative that you've ever told about this issue.
January 6th is bullshit?
No, it was
election denial is bullshit.
Hey, Jake, don't interrupt. Let him finish.
He's interrupting me every 2 seconds. Stay out of it, Freeberg.
Oh, I just want you guys to, guys. I just want you guys to speak and then let the other person speak. That's it. I'm not on any side. Go ahead.
My point is just
here we go again.
I don't want to rehash every single thing in the past, but look, the point is that I think we have more electable candidates. I think we have candidates that would get more done in office, and I've already said so, that doesn't mean I believe this whole threat to democracy thing. I think that is massive inflation of the actual threat. But look, if you want me to say that we have more electable candidates, we have candidates who will get more done, who frankly would be less alienating to moderates and independents and could even win over some moderate Democrats the way that DeSantis did in Florida to win by 19 points. Yes, happy to say that. And I've been saying that.
I will just say, if Freeberg allows me to make a point, I would like to say it is a threat to democracy, January 6th, and election denial. Those two things are acute threats to democracy.
Why did the Democratic Party fund over $50 million to those candidates?
Cynical because they wanted to win. Cynicism, pure cynicism.
Okay, we're on the same page about that.
Yeah, it's pure cynicism. But let me ask you a question, and then we'll wrap on this because I know it's uncomfortable for Freeberg to watch mommy and daddy fight. It's okay. I know we're triggering some childhood trauma. Freeberg, I know this has to do with some childhood trauma. It's cool. Yeah. It's okay. Mommy and daddy still love each other, even if we fight sometimes.
It just makes me want to turn the volume down. Go ahead.
We're almost done.
Anyway. I do think fielding moderate candidates is the path. And I think, Chamath, you brought this up a ton of times. It's the race to whoever can get that moderate middle. And I hope that they field better candidates. But do you think, Sachs, he's running? This is one of the cynical takes, is that he's running because it will help all the legal cases against him. Do you think there's anything to that?
My guess is that they see him as an easier candidate to beat, and they're going to do everything they can to try and keep him in the news. And I don't think that's your position. I actually think that you're being sincere, that you don't want him to win a second term. I mean, remember, we don't know. I think we all believe that we're going to have a pretty severe recession next year. So just because the Democrats' cynical strategy in the midterms of promoting, what they called election deniers in the primary, that happened to work. But just because it worked last time doesn't mean it's going to work next time.
And abortion absolutists and a whole bunch of other things. I think the point is pretty much this, which is that people gave Trump a lot of credit for being an idiot savant, but it looks like he's more of an idiot savant minus the savant. Okay, this is kind of a goofball who has a brilliant media strategy, and he had his finger on the pulse in a moment, and then he just couldn't execute, couldn't put two and two together, couldn't put one foot in front of the other, and he was way too divisive, and he got booted out, and he lost fair and square. And now what the Republicans have to realize is if they don't figure out how to field somebody out of the primaries that is different than Trump, the Democrats will win. Because if it is Trump, whoever the Democratic candidate is, I don't think it really matters, will crush Trump.
Yeah, look, I think that's likely correct. I mean, I think that we talked about it last week. You cannot win the presidency with, call it 45% of the vote. I mean, Trump is capped at that amount.
And the scary thing for Republicans, by the way, is Trump does a much better job than anybody else in getting his base activated. So the thing that all these polls get wrong, and I think they've consistently gotten wrong, and as a result have underestimated him, is they don't give him the credit he deserves duly for being able to curate a fervent base of that 30 or 40% of America that will show up for him. And even if they didn't show up as much in the midterms, they sure as hell showed up in the primaries for his candidates oftentimes. So I just think it's a very dangerous cocktail that you can't sleep on. So the Republicans have to take this really serious. If moderate Republicans want to have a chance of winning, you guys have to figure out how to beat Trump in a ground game. Because if his base shows up, he has a decent chance of winning the nomination, but then you will lose the general.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much spot on. I think Republicans really have to be smart and disciplined and think about, we have to nominate the most electable candidate. But here's the thing: is we're not even debating policy right now. No one really says that, hey, on a policy basis, there's a huge difference between, say, Trump and DeSantis or some other folks. It's all about personal style. And is it really worth it to the Republicans to potentially lose the next election based on style points? It's a silly reason to lose. You know, William F. Buckley a long time ago said that he would always support the most electable conservative candidate. He didn't always go with the most conservative candidate. He wanted to go with the most electable candidate who met a basic policy bar. And he sometimes got in trouble for that. For example, he supported Bush 41 over Jack Kemp. I know I'm going back a long way, but in any event, you know, thinking about electability is just really important.
There's one silver lining here. The head of the Republican Party, Rupert Murdoch, has absolutely dissed Trump. I don't know if you saw the New York Post, but he put on the cover of the New York Post, a little incredible. Lower, like 10. Florida man makes announcement, and on page 26, he had the announcement of Trump running for president.
And the funny thing was,
you lose Rupert Murdoch.
He didn't even name Trump as the president until the absolute last line of that column. And he said, oh, and he also happened to be the 45th president of the United States.
Yeah.
It was very funny.
What you're seeing a lot of Republicans saying, I think correctly, is that if you want to win elections, you have to look out the windshield, you know, not in the rearview mirror. And what we saw in the midterms is that even talking about 2020 was at minimum a giant waste of time and a distraction, and at maximum potentially cause these candidates to lose. I mean, the fact of the matter is that a lot of candidates, including some I supported in battleground states, who got lured into trying to relitigate 2020, they all got vaporized. And I just think it's stupid to be talking about the past. Voters want you to focus on the future. And especially when there's no policy outcome that matters, that's at stake, for you to be talking about a past election instead of the future and the current election you're in. It's just politically stupid.
Freeberg, if I may bring you into this discussion, as uncomfortable as it might be, would you vote for Biden, incredibly old? I don't know, he's going to be 81 or 82 in the next election. Would you vote for Biden or DeSantis?
As I go through the list of things I'm most concerned about in the world today, number one is the debt and spending cycle of the federal government in the U.S. I think it's the most kind of scary set of facts and conditions that we're getting set up for kind of a major crisis 10 to 15 years from now, because you can't afford all the debt that we've taken on as a country, as well as the entitlement, as well as defense. And so something's got to give. And there's a bunch of paths that could emerge from that set of conditions that are all really scary paths and not good. I'm more concerned about that than I am about nuclear war or climate change, just to be clear, because I think that the social effects and the global geopolitical effects that arise from the U.S. kind of destructuring because of our debt and spending cycle that we're in right now are far more significant than what we'll experience over the same period of time. And again, I do think that technology is going to resolve a lot of our issues with climate change, and I think nuclear war, cool heads will prevail. Everyone's got a family. So that's what I'm most concerned about. So any kind of voting decision I make is made with that lens, which is what's the best path to supporting some sort
fiscal
of
responsibility,
step back to resolve those issues. As Charlie Munger said so well in this interview that was published this week, and I've said it a few times on the show, but he's a much better speaker than I. Uses far fewer words. But in democracy, eventually the populace realizes they can vote themselves all the money. And, that's what we see happen in an accelerated way in Latin America. We've seen that with a lot of these democracies that ultimately resolve to kind of socialism. And in the US, we're seeing a lot of this behavior where we're kind of voting ourselves all the money. We're putting in place politicians, and the populace is saying, I want, and more money comes out. And it totally decreases the strength and the resiliency of our nation and our economy. And it's the most concerning thing to me, because the incredible innovation and economic engine that is the United States is threatened, and it really threatens a lot of stability in the world today.
Chamath, any final thoughts here as we wrap up the political discussion? I think you're obviously a Democrat, so you're voting for Biden, but you also care about fiscal responsibility. So where are you at with your vote for 2024?
I don't think that we know who's actually running on either ticket yet, just to be completely honest. So That's my perspective. My other comment is I think what David said is so spot on. The single biggest issue that we have is that we have made a huge decision to deglobalize, and that deglobalization has the risk of introducing a hyperinflation loop. And we won't know how bad that is for another year or two.
Why would it do that? Why would it?
Well, think about it this way.
Deglobalization costs hyperinflation.
Yeah,
Explain that.
So today, let's just say you buy a chip to make the iPhone. You buy that chip from, TSMC that makes it in Taiwan, ships it to China, and the entire world is serviced with that supply chain that keeps that chip as cheap as possible. Now, with the CHIPS Act as an example, we will build resilient supply chains where now instead of one place, it'll come from 6 places. 5 of those 6 will be in allied territories. The United States, Western Europe, potentially Mexico. The thing with that is that now is 6x more equipment that you're buying, right? Instead of one machine, you now have 6 machines. Instead of one person operating the machine in one country, you have 6 people in 6 countries. As you can imagine, when you layer up all these costs, there is no world in which that chip is as cheap as it was before. And so the cost of that has to be borne either by the consumer who pays a higher price, that's measured as inflation, or by the government who subsidizes it at the point of import, that'll be measured by debt. And so one way or the other, in our path now towards more resiliency and national security, which, by the way, I think is the absolute right decision, okay? Energy independence, all of this stuff we have to do today. We are at risk of a hyperinflationary loop if not managed well. And so you have to be really on the levers of the economy, and you have to understand it deeply. The person that deserves the most credit of preventing this hyperinflationary loop right now is Joe Manchin. And hopefully the history books, whatever Jay Powell does, I think has been good. But the fact that Manchin prevented $6 trillion more dollars of being pumped into the economy in the last 2 years is probably the single thing that prevented inflation, instead of peaking at 9, from peaking at 15 or 16. I think it would have been a national disaster without that.
Chamath is right. That extra $6 trillion that Manchin stopped would have been a national disaster. But let's also give credit to every Republican because they also voted against it. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the
pressure was on Manchin to do the thing and see the forest from the trees, and he did that.
Yeah, no, look, I agree. I agree that
profiling courage.
That's a profiling courage.
I agree that he was in the hot seat. Well, so was Sinema, by the way. Sinema didn't go for the $3.5 trillion Build Back Better, but then Manchin, went along with the $750 billion version of BBB, which they renamed the Inflation Reduction Act. That was kind of a disappointment. So, frankly, I give more credit to the Republicans. They were against all of it, and the Democrats jammed it through. So if you're worried about all of this trillions and trillions of unnecessary spending, why don't you give the Republicans a chance?
I'm talking about the delta between what was spent and what could have been. The entirety of the gap was prevented by Joe Manchin.
I know, but it was Joe Manchin siding with the Republicans. My point is just, look, neither party is perfect on spending. They both want to spend too much money. But at this particular moment in time, the Republicans are more restrained about spending than the Democrats.